right. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning into this presentation, if you are doing so. Like you know, we actually don't have a class this week because we have a couple things going on. I know there's a field trip, and also the ERI and the Environmental Club are doing the tree planting thing in the Pine Ridge. So instead of just doing a class with me and maybe one or two other people, thought it'd be better if we just leave it for next week. So I took this opportunity to just maybe share a little bit of information for you about stuff that's not strictly necessary to know in terms of creating solid figures and analyses in R, but can be helpful. And that is theming your data visualizations with ggplot. So we talked about ggplot for 2 weeks in a row now, and you guys may be a little bit ggplotted out, but I love ggplot. It's one of the best packages out there. If you want to make clean, clear scientific figures, it's excellent. It's excellent for that. And we've talked a lot about the preset themes, so our theme minimal, our theme classic, but something that we haven't talked about at all really is building our own themes. So how do we have all that like little control about every little thing in your graph? As if you're a bit of a control freak like I am, then that's definitely something you want control over. I want to be able to add titles, adjust background colors, tweak the Cartesian grid to how I like it, add labels and arrows and all sorts of things. And I also want to talk about facets with you. So that's the general agenda for today. And let's jump right in. Oh, and I will say this is totally optional, if that wasn't clear already. If you don't watch this little presentation here, you can jump back into the R class next week and you'll be totally caught up to speed. This is just for people that want a little bit extra control and they want to jazz up their ggplots a little bit. Clear? Okay. Oh, yes, there we go. And actually, I do believe, yes, I got a laser pointer. PowerPoint is great. Okay. So we are going to be working with the spider data once more. I promise this is the last time we're going to be looking at the spider data. So as before, we should be setting our working directory. We should be reading in the CSV with read.csv, and we should be assigning the NAs. So remember, NA strings for this data set are unknown and blank. So we're putting all the strings we wanted to consider an NA in this vector here. And then we're going to be omitting those NAs from this data set, just for the purpose of these visualizations. And we should also load in ggplot2, our favorite data visualization package. So before we dive in, let's quickly review the format of a ggplot using the grammar of graphics. You've seen this twice before, but I really want it to be in your head because it'll help you down the road when you're making plots, so you don't have to go from scratch or copy large chunks of code off the internet. So remember, we call the base function with ggplot, and then we specify the data. In the aesthetic components, we're mapping the variables to the plot. For example, here we're mapping spider size to X. And then we have our geometries. So here we're creating a histogram with geom histogram. And then we add our theme component, which in this case is just theme minimal. So like I said, we've been using pre-built themes, but this week we're going to be creating a custom theme. So this section here is going to be expanding a lot. So this is just the same thing as before. This code gives us a basic histogram in the theme minimal. You can see there's not much going on, and this is what we're going to be improving upon. So instead of using the pre-built theme, we're going to be adding theme elements bit by bit ourselves, and we're going to do that within the theme function, which is right here. If we run the theme function with our ggplot without any arguments inside of it, we're just going to get this, which is the default settings for a ggplot. Not pretty. We got that horrid gray background and the white grid lines. Not loving it. So we want to customize our ggplot better. And we're going to go through different ways we can customize it, and bit by bit, we'll build a theme that works for us. And I do encourage you, I'm going to be showing you down the road what I like to set all of my theme presets to be, but I encourage you to try and play around a little bit and kind of get a theme that you really like, that can clearly communicate scientific information. And then that can kind of be like your standard theme that you're using for everything, and you can have a bit of a recognizable plot when you're sharing it. So we're going to start by customizing the background look, and the major grid lines, which come up from each axis tick, like 60, 90, 5, 10, and the minor grid lines, which come up from each halfway point, like here and here and here. Okay, so in terms of the background, we have the panel background, which is a gray box, and the plot background, which is the space around it. And in the default, it's just white. We can't even see a plot background. So background can be customized in theme. So we're actually adding in some parameters to theme here. It's no longer just blank. And it looks like a lot, but don't worry, it's quite straightforward, I promise. We just got panel.background, which controls the panel background, like I just showed you. We've got plot.background, which controls the plot background, this white space. Panel grid minor, which are the minor grid lines, and panel grid major, which are the major grid lines. And to keep things simple for now, all I did is I assigned each of these element blank. Now, element blank basically just means get rid of them. I don't want any background or any grid lines. So we're starting from scratch here, just getting rid of them all. So what would this look like if we run this code? Pretty much as we'd expect. Element blank removes the elements. We have no background or grid lines. So what are other ways that we can change elements besides removing it entirely with element blank? We know about this first one. If we want to remove the element, we would use element blank. We'd assign element blank. But we want to probably do some things that are not just removing it entirely. We want customization. So one option is to treat an element like a rectangle. So why would we ever want to do that? Why would we want to treat something like a rectangle? Well, think of the background. The background is basically just one big rectangle. So by making the background a rectangle, we can customize it with a fill color. We can customize it with an outline color. And we can adjust the line width, all like we've done for other aspects of our ggplot. So by making it a rectangle, we can actually use these different parameters. So fill equals, color equals, line width equals, all sorts of things. Another option is to treat the element like a line. And this is useful in a variety of cases, like if we want to customize our grid lines, because our grid lines are just a bunch of lines. So we can customize the color. We can customize the line width. Do you want it thick or thin? And we can customize the line type. Like this here is ... dotted. And there are also many other line type options: blank, solid, dashed, dotted, dot dash, long dash, two dash, all sorts of different things. You can even create your own line type. I'm not going to show you how to do that, but feel free to look it up online if you want to create a dash, dot, dot, dash, dot, dash, dash, dot, solid pattern. You can do so. You can do so. And finally, we can treat the element like text. And this is really useful for our axis labels, our legend, or any annotations we want to add in. Anything that you want to be reading can be treated like an element text. And look at all of the things we can do with our text. We can make it smaller or bigger. We can put it on an angle. Like, think of a case where you have a ton of different variables on your x-axis, and they're all squished and cramped up, and you can't read it. Well, if you tilt them all 45-degree angle, suddenly they fit, and you can read it all. Face is really useful too. This is our bold or italics, stuff like that. So if we're having trouble reading something, we can just bold it and have it be easier to visualize. Then we have our font. If you want to make things, you have a standard font that you like using, like if you're like, man, I've just got to use Gill Sans, I can't be doing Arial, then this is your place to change the font to your ideal font. Vertical adjustment is when you're trying to shift the text up, and horizontal adjustment is when you're trying to shift the text to the left or to the right. And color, of course, if you just got to have that text in blue, this is how you do it. And options for the line face and R include plain, italic, bold, and bold.italic, which is bold and italic. So you don't just have to pick one or the other. Okay, so now that we have all that information about the different elements, let's actually assign some of these more complicated elements to those parameters. Starting again with panel.background, the background of our panel. So I want it to be a rectangle, so I can fill it light blue, put a dark green border, and make it a thick dark green border, line width 10. Plot background, I just want to make it an orange rectangle, that's fine. The minor grid lines, I'm going to make them lines that are hot pink, thick, and dashed. Yes, very good. And the major grid lines, I'm just going to make them thin with line width 1, black, and dotted. So all of this nonsense, we're going to try and visualize by running the code. And voila, we get a horrible plot. But we can see very clearly the elements we've added here, which is of course why I'm torturing your eyes with this specific plot. Here we have our panel background. It is fill light blue, color dark green, line width 10, just like we specified. Plot background is an orange rectangle, just like we specified. The major grid lines are black and dotted and thin, just like we told R to do. And look, R is such a great listener. It's following all of my bossy instructions because the minor grid lines are hot pink, line width 5, and dashed. Okay, so we have this horrible version, but of course you guys are not here to learn how to make horrible plots. I hope you guys are here to know how to make customized, clean plots. So here is an example of something that I might do if I want to get a nice, clear plot. Okay, so here we have our panel.background is an element rectangle, and it's going to be fill of white, color of black, and line width of 1. The background of the plot is going to be just a white rectangle, which if you guys aren't paying attention, that just means I don't want to see it. I don't want to see a plot background. I don't think it's necessary, and it clutters things up a bit, but some people like it, and that's okay. For the minor grid lines, I want to make sure that they're dark gray, line width of 0.5, and dotted. And the major grid lines, same thing, but I'm going to make them dashed, so they're just a little bit distinct. And again, you can go through this and change it to what you personally prefer. This is just the presets that I typically go with. So we can see here how it would look plotted onto a basic histogram with no other features. And I think it looks pretty nice. So one potential problem here is we put ourselves in a bit of a situation. All we've done is customize the background. We haven't even looked at axes or text or anything. And already the code is filling up a whole page on my PowerPoint. And this just is not going to do. This is messy code, and messy code is not good. So this is where our lessons all the way back in week 1 are coming back into play. If you remember, we learned how to assign objects, which basically is adding any object that we create to the global environment. And we do that with an equal sign. Then we can call the object at any time to retrieve the value. So for example, if I assign the string Jess to my name, which happens to be my name, then whenever I type my name, it'll return the stored value. So we can do that for simple things like my name, but we can also do it for much more complicated things. Like all of this code that we just wrote for customizing the background, we can dump it all into this one word, background. And then anytime we use that word, it just pulls it from the global environment, and we can use it to customize our plots consistently. So here, this is all the code we have to do to recreate that exact same plot we just made. And the cool thing about this is that we can treat it as a preset option for themes in general and apply it to other plots that we make. So it can be consistent across our bar graphs, our pie charts, our histograms, our box plots, anything that we want to make, we can customize it with the exact same presets. So here's a simple bar plot that I made. And all I have to do is add background, which we defined earlier, and it will make the exact same changes as we did with our histogram. Great. We can even simplify things further. Let's give our histogram a name too. So this is just our basic histogram we've been using this whole time. And instead of having to type out ggplot, my data, AES, X equals all of that, I can just call it size_histogram. And then it will go straight to the global environment. And all I have to do now is do size histogram plus background, and it's going to create that whole complicated plot, and we don't have to worry about typing it out each time. Okay, so now that we've gotten that out of the way, let's continue with customizing our axes. Axes can also be customized in theme. So here we have size histogram, and then we're adding the theme function to the histogram like we did with background. And we're setting our axis lines to blank and our axis ticks to blank. So basically, we're just back to our basic histogram, but there are no lines for the X and Y axes and no tick marks, which should be here if you remember. Okay, so here's a version that I personally like when I'm customizing axis ticks. I'm making the axis lines blank because I don't think they're necessary. And I'm making the axis tick size 1.25 and black so that they're easy to see. And the customized, the presets that R usually uses, they're gray and they're quite thin. And I think personally, when I'm trying to read scientific figures, I want to be very clear on where the numbers are referring to when the tick marks are there. So I like to just make them a bit more obvious. And here we go, some very noticeable axis ticks. So now let's do what we did before. Let's assign the axis customization to a name and assemble the histogram. Okay, so I'm going to call it axes and then just dump all of that long code into axes, keeping it real simple. And then we just use size histogram plus background plus axes. So I think you guys should be seeing already, basically what we're doing here is we're assembling our customized options bit by bit. So we define them up above, like, okay, this is all my background code. This is all my axes code. This is all my histogram code. And then we're putting it in these simple little variables that we're storing it. And then we can call them to assemble all sorts of graphs. So we can add a bar plot to these different things. We can add a box plot, all sorts of things. Okay, so moving forward, now we're going to talk about titles. So titles are a little bit different in that when we're actually adding in what we want the titles to be, we're using the labs function instead of the themes function. So inside the labs function, we basically are just assigning within it title equals, subtitle equals. And there are other things we can do too. You can check online, like you can add a caption if you want, all sorts of things. But we're just going to go with a title and a subtitle to keep things simple for now. So I want my title to be histogram of spider size, subtitle Ecuador 2018. And I'm going to call that title labels. So I'm storing that in there. And then if we want to customize the text, remember we have element text, which is for that, which is distinct from element rectangle and our element line. So I'm going to call titles, all of this, and it's going to be theme. Our plot title should be an element text. I want to make it nice and big, size 15 and bolded. And here we have a parameter HJust. I don't know if you remember from a few slides ago, but this is our horizontal adjustment. So by calling HJust 0.5, I'm saying I want it halfway across the page. So the text should be centered instead of being squished up all on the left side. And I'm going to do the same thing with the subtitle. I'm just going to make it a slightly smaller size and HJust 0.5. And then just like before, we're adding it to our size histogram with all of those customization options. And here we go, our histogram of spider size. And already it's starting to look way nicer. It's starting to look professional. So we're just going to keep going and get in more options for you to add to your toolkit here. Axis labels. So on our previous slide here, one thing that kind of stands out still is here we have spider underscore size. And the reason that R automatically does that is because that was what our variable name was called. That's what the column name was. If you type spider space size in Excel and then load it into R, R does not like that. You can't have a space in a column name. So it'll automatically add either an underscore or a dot. So basically that means is that our X and our Y labels are almost always going to be not what we want. But luckily we can customize it with our axis labels. So X label, I'm going to set equal to XLab spider space size. And our Y label should be YLab and count with a capital C instead of the automatic lowercase. So it should just look a little bit cleaner. And then I'll add it like usual. And we can see right away the change is taking effect. Moving forward, axis text. So we just talked about axis labels, which are these. But these here are 0, 5, 10, 15. That's our axis text. So we can customize that too, just with our element text. So here I'm just making things bigger and bolded essentially. And I'm dumping all of this axis title X, axis title Y, axis text X, axis text Y. I'm putting all of that code into XY and adding it. So it's the same process over and over. And I'm kind of picking up the pace a bit here because it really is just the same thing. We're customizing different components of theme. We're making sure we're assigning it the correct element, whether it's element blank, element rectangle, or element line, or element text. And then we're just customizing it how we want with the exact same options for each thing. And here we see it's a little bit bigger and it's bolded now, so it's easier to see. Okay, great. So this is pretty much all we need to do to get a basic customization theme for a simple plot like this. It's just a histogram. There's really not much to it. I think this is perfectly fine, perfectly clear, perfectly acceptable. But I just want to give you guys a little bit more to work with. So we're going to try jazzing up our histogram a little bit, and we're going to add another aesthetic component to it. So if you remember in our aesthetics for this histogram, all we have is X equal to spider size. That's literally the only aesthetic parameter that we set. So we're going to try adding in a fill into our aesthetics. And if you remember from last week, remember anytime we add something into aesthetics, it's mapping a variable and then plotting it. So I'm setting fill equal to web type. So that means that the fill color is going to be based on what web type the spider builds. And this is just the same code. All I'm doing is adding that in, and I'm overwriting my size histogram. So I can keep using the same code we did before, but this is our new size histogram. So this down here, the exact same code from last slide. And when I run it, I get this. It's all of our theming we did, but now we have this web type being mapped to fill. And of course, this is our little lesson on customizing. We see we have more to customize here in the legend. So this is how we customize our legends. Within the theme, we can choose the position of the legend. So do you want it to be at the top, bottom, left, or right? Legend direction means whether we're stacking the legend items vertically or horizontally. And then legend title is just what's our element text parameters for the title, legend text, element text for the legend text. And this is just the difference here. This is the title and this is the text. And that is all going to be called legend because that's our theme. And then here we have our legend labels. So I don't want any of these underscores and I want things to be nice and capitalized and clear. So we're going to do that within scale, fill, manual, a different function than theme. So it has to be a different label here. So I'm making the name equal to web type, labels, orb, sheet and tangle. And then I'm actually going to set the colors in here too, since I'm already working on the legend. And I'm going to set those equal to lavender. So orb should be lavender, sheet and tangle should be light pink, and tangle should be light blue. So they just directly map there, and you can define it all right in this one code. And then we're adding it on to the rest of everything else, running it, and there we go. A very nice and girly color palette. But you see our legend formatted correctly. It's at the bottom, and it's stacked horizontally, and it has those nice new labels. But of course, now that I'm looking at it, I'm noticing a slight problem, which is that these different colors really blend together. It's kind of hard to see the difference between one and another. So I'm kind of wishing that it outlined the histogram bars in black so that I can see better. But lucky for us, we can actually do that really quickly. All we have to do is overwrite our size histogram again, just like we did before when we were adding in the fill. So it's the exact same, just overwriting it. And all I'm doing is adding in the geometry, color equals black. Because remember, whenever we're making a change to the geometry, we do it in the geometry section, the geometry component. So I'm setting the whole color, which is outline color, to black. And then I'm just running the same thing with my new size histogram. And there we go. Awesome. And we can actually do the same thing where we're just overwriting and rerunning if we want to change aspects of our customization. Like, say, for example, you decide with retrospect that these colors are maybe a touch too girly. You can just quickly change the colors to be brighter and bolder. So, for example, if I want to have my color palette inspired by a Motmon. But does R have colors for these exact shades? No. But R will take a hex code for absolutely any color, which is what I'm going to quickly show you how to do. So just using the PowerPoint eyedropper tool, all I did was eyedrop from different aspects of the bird. And I went, okay, this blue, this yellow, and this green, and it gives me the hex code for each one. And if for some reason you don't have PowerPoint or you want a different tool to be able to do this, you can use the HTML color codes website. And all you have to do is put in a picture, and then it will tell you the hex codes that are included in the picture, which is very handy. So you can totally customize your palette from scratch with hex codes. So see here, this is the same legend label code as before, and we're overwriting it. And we're overwriting it with, instead of lavender, light blue, and light pink, we're doing the exact hex codes. And R will actually color these when you type it in the correct color if you have the hex code in, so you can see if it's working or not. And then rerunning everything. Very good, much better, very cheery. So you can see at any time, it's really easy to just overwrite any of your customizations or your ggplot to quickly change the parameters around. Okay, so we're almost done here. The final thing that we're going to be talking about today is facets. Now, if you remember way back at the start of our ggplot2 journey, facets are the mysterious sixth component. So we have our base, we have our data, we have our aesthetics, which is mapping variables, We have our geometries, which is bar plot, box plot, pie chart, all of that. We have our theme, which is what we've been working on today. And then we have this mysterious facets. And facets, all they do is split your plot into separate panels based on a variable. So here we have all of what we just did, our size histogram plus our customizations plus facet wrap. And we want to create panels based on web type. So every different web type should have a different panel. And we can see right away what this looks like. Like, seriously, guys, all we did was add this one little extra bit of code. And I love facets. I think this looks really great. And these are actually a pain to make in Excel. Like if you're trying to recreate something that looks like this in Excel, it's very hard to split it out in facets like this. So I'm very grateful to R for making it so easy with facet wrap. Like I use facets all the time. But you know, the point of the lecture today is on customization, and you know that I'm just eyeing this underscore here in sheet underscore tangle. So, you know, we're going to have to cover stuff like this. How do we customize this further? And I'm going to show you with an example with more facets. So here we have facet wrap by location instead of by web type. So I'm just redoing the code. And the reason is this gives us more boxes to work with. We have 3 rows and 3 columns. And you see we have the same problem with underscores. Okay, so how do we customize our facet wrap? We're doing this all within our facet wrap function. So everything in here is within this one function. Pretty intense. So it's by location like we did before. Here, I'm just putting in number of rows and number of columns to be 3 just to keep it consistent. And then I'm adding in a labeler. So basically the labeler requires a function that changes the names of all of our levels of location. I don't like this as much as when you're editing theme. Theme is very easy to change the labels. Facet, it's a little bit trickier, but you'll see here there's a clear pattern. And that is old name, new name. Old name, new name. So it was called Borja right here, but I want it to be called San Francisco de Borja. Cocodrilos can stay the same, Cocodrilos. Narupa will become Sumaco Galeras. So all of these different things, Papayacta lower becomes Papayacta 3,000 to 3,500 meters above sea level. So you're just doing the old one and the new one, and then it will overwrite all of the labels for you. And I know this is something that a lot of people actually struggle with. I've noticed because this system is so different than the rest of the theming systems, because it's within facets, a lot of people have trouble with labeling their facets. So if you follow this pattern, it should work for you. Just make sure you're using as.labeler or as_labeler, and then putting all of your changes in a vector with the C there. And you see it just loads in the new labels and makes it look very nice and professional. Okay, final thing that we're going to quickly go over here. As you see, we have an element text and an element rectangle. If you're paying attention, you'll immediately clue into these different things. And anytime we have a rectangle or text, we can customize it. So if we want to hone in on the background for our strips and our facet, these are the strips here, these rectangles. We use strip.background, and then we can customize it as we like with element rectangle. And same thing for strip text, which would be an element text. Same thing as before, just a different case. I'm going to call all of this facet theme, plop it on, and then here is our final completely customized ggplot. So what a huge difference, right? Between just our basic using theme minimal or theme classic. This, we have total control over every element, and we can really just make it suit the project that we're working on, so we can most clearly communicate the information. And like I said too, if you have something that you're using time and time again, it can kind of be like an easy go-to. So you don't have to think, oh, I love theme minimal, but I wish it had different grid lines. You can just build it from scratch, so you can clearly communicate the scientific information to your preferred audience. And of course, there are tons and tons and tons of ways to customize that we didn't go over today, because I just wanted to do a really short little overview since we're not doing an art class this week. Just on theme, like a little optional class here. But there are many things that we didn't cover. For example, you can change how your coordinates are being divided here. So say I wanted it to go 0, 2, 4, 6, 10 instead of 0, 5, 10. I can do that. Or for example, like all sorts of different things that if you want to be customizing it, you can do it all sorts of different ways. So in order to do that, I would say just go online, look at the ggplot2 cheat sheet, look at the dplyr cheat sheet, ask questions to the internet. Stack Exchange is a great resource. If you think, hang on, my plot is great, I just want to do this one thing to it, I just want to tweak this one thing, look it up. The internet is a great resource for anything R related. I use it all the time if I'm wondering, hey, can I customize this one little thing because I think it would better communicate the information? Like instead of stacking the histograms on top of each other, can I show them side by side? Instead of doing this, can I do that? Just ask the internet, and chances are someone else has had the same question and someone has built the code in order to do it. But I hope that this gives you a really solid foundation for building a custom theme that you really like. So the last thing that I'm just gonna really quickly show you here. Oh, just gonna hop over to R, share my screen again. RStudio. Okay, so I just wanted to show you a real life example of how we can actually use what we just talked about. So, you know, it may seem like a lot of fluff and a lot of code just making the same histogram all over again. But here's an example of real code that I am using in my job, which is at the ERI as a data scientist. And here I'm checking for the bias in our data for collector, time, and season. And you see at the top, I'm doing the usual, okay, this is all my data I'm loading in. These are the packages. And then I have a section here, theme/color presets. And I have a whole custom theme equals, and then this is everything in the theme function. Very similar to what we just went over, because I tend to use very similar styles in all my plots because I think it's consistent. So I can just customize it how I like. And then every single time in this code that I'm using colors or I'm using a custom theme, all I have to do is call these from the global environment. And I'll have a really high level of consistency between all of the plots in a project, which I think is great. And then I don't have to worry, okay, are things going to be looking the same? Are they going to be centered properly? It'll just automatically do everything how I like it. A side note here, this palette, I think it's a really great one. It's a colorblind friendly palette, as not everybody in science is able to see all of these subtle little girly colors in the original palette I showed you. So that is an example if you want to copy those hex codes. And then here I have just one last little bit of code to show you. Here I have a script called ggplot themes. And when I'm starting a new project, all I have to do is copy this information, which is the same information at the top here. And then I can just tweak it for whatever I want the project to be. If a project requires titles on the plots, then I'll include titles. If it doesn't, I won't. And then I just put it at the top for the whole code and set it as a preset. And I also have options down here for all of the other stuff that we talked about, like labels and the legend fill, legend color, all of that. And here is an example of what I talked about before, where you're setting the different like breaks. So instead of 0, 5, 10, 15, it's 0, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. So this is where you would do that. Okay, and that is everything that I kind of wanted to talk about you guys with today, just on this little side information session here. And I hope that you find it useful, and I hope to see you all next week, Friday. All right, take care. Bye-bye.